Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. This evening we'll be talking a bit about Samadhi and Vipassana, so two very important topics in Buddhist meditation practice. So we'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then the two of us will say a few words on the topic, and then we'll take any questions that you might have. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as mentioned, the topic for this evening is Samadhi and Vipassana. So maybe we can start by inviting Tanwei to say a few introductory words on the topic of Samadhi and Vipassana and its relevance to our Buddhist practice.
Sure. Well, Venerable Bhante Sudaso gave a talk on the subject of Samadhi actually on Sunday, and had many wonderful things to share. And one of the things I appreciated was the encouragement to each practitioner to try to develop Samadhi, both for its the wonderful experience in and of itself, and also as a platform for developing Vipassana and developing the insight knowledges. I think that your encouragement to practice long periods of sitting meditation and the development of Samadhi sounds like excellent advice. And perhaps one thing that comes to mind right off the top of my head about talking about Samadhi is I have often talked about the benefits of practicing the Uposatha day, and is setting aside a day for a retreat each week, as indicated in the suttas. I've been very beneficial experiences with this myself in lay life, finding it is a special day each week to kind of realign my priorities and spend time in meditation and some study as well. And it felt so good to spend the day trying to making the mind kind of calmer than usual. So perhaps that's a practical note I can draw from my own experience.
Yeah, so again, it's emphasizing then the importance of conduct as an impact on Samadhi. So often when we talk about the development of Samadhi, we spend a lot of time talking about meditation techniques. But as we were talking about on Sunday, a lot of what impacts the power of our Samadhi is not what we're doing during meditation, but it's what we're doing with the rest of our time. So the Uposatha practices are actually a great example of that. So thank you for bringing that up. Because the Uposatha practices are practices which are designed to help support a quiet mind, a contented mind, an uncluttered mind, a mind which is not fixated on desire or distraction. So actually, would you like to explain in a bit more detail what the Uposatha practice is and why that supports our Samadhi?
Sure. Well, we find it in the Pali Suttas, in the Dhammika Sutta, in the Sutta Nipata, where the Buddha describes the lay path. He describes both the path for mendicants and the path for lay people, in response to a question from a lay supporter, Dhammika. And he explains that for the lay person, the 1 day a week, the Uposatha day, is an integral part of the lay person's path, during which one follows the precepts and spends time in meditation. And he goes into more detail, talking with the foremost female lay disciple, Lady Visakha, where he describes the 8 precepts and also gives her several meditation themes that she could practice. The meditation on her sila, her morality, her moral conduct and adherence to the precepts, and meditation on the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and also a recollection of the devas. And so showing that we could practice a wide range of different meditation techniques on the Uposatha day, and that the foundation for it is the 8 precepts. Perhaps I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the 8 precepts. Maybe I should mention those in brief. The precept against killing, the precept against stealing, against the precept of keeping celibacy, the precept against telling lies, and the precept against intoxicants, the precept against eating past midday, and against beautifying oneself and engaging in entertainment, and the precept against sleeping on sleeping or sitting on high or imposing beds or seats. So this is a day where the practitioner really focuses on the Dhamma practice, not engaging in, for example, in entertainment, not indulging in entertainment, for example. Not indulging in sexuality or in taking intoxicants or any of these kinds of things, but focusing really on Dhamma practice. So setting aside the whole day with the mindset that this day is for the Dhamma really sets the stage mentally for focusing on our meditation practice. It could be difficult, I think, in my own experience. Sometimes it can be difficult to set this time aside, and sometimes waking up in the morning on the Uposatha day feeling like, oh, I have so many things I want to do, or there's so many opportunities to do other things. But I found that with some commitment to it and sticking to it, I found that as the day went on and I continued practicing, I found it to be very calming and very nourishing kind of practice. So that's something I can recommend.
Yeah, so again, since we spoke fairly extensively about how to develop Samadhi recently, I think it'd be interesting at this point to talk a bit about why Samadhi is important in its connection with Vipassana practice. So there's been a strong movement, and over the past 100 years or so, there's been a strong movement in Buddhism to emphasize Vipassana meditation or Vipassana practice as being the critical piece which leads to awakening. And there's actually good reason for this. So if one looks at the suttas, we see that the Buddha repeatedly emphasizes that the critical things for awakening are a direct, clear perception of impermanence, so anicca, so a clear understanding of the temporary, impermanent, insubstantial nature of all things. And also the direct perception of anatta, so the fundamentally impersonal nature of all things, that ultimately nothing can be called me or mine, that the things which we call me and mine are simply temporary, arbitrary designations with no ultimate truth behind them. So these are ideas, and it's important in our practice to bring these beyond the level of mere ideas into the level of direct experience. And this is where Samadhi becomes really important, because again, we say something like, everything is impermanent, and we might even approve of that idea, we might even agree with it, we might even have faith in it, but nonetheless our experience is an experience of me, a permanent ongoing entity, with this permanent ongoing body, is interacting with those permanent ongoing entities and those permanent ongoing objects in a permanent ongoing world. So although we might theoretically believe in impermanence, nonetheless our actual experience seems to be constantly contradicting that. Our actual experience is one of nicca, of permanent, stable objects. And then when one believes in permanent, stable objects, then it's very easy to believe in a permanent self, to believe I exist as an ongoing, stable entity. And the Buddha then talks about several different kinds of wrong view of self. So it all, there's four, one of the ways he divides it up is 4 varieties of self-view applied to each of the 5 khandhas for a total of 20 kinds of self-view. So, for example, thinking myself, the body is myself, or thinking the body belongs to myself, or thinking myself is in my body, or my body is in myself. And then the same for the other 4 khandhas. So Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana. So feeling, recognition, mental formations, and consciousness. So again, we have these ideas about anicca and anatta, but what is it that's preventing us from actually altering our experience of reality in order to match these views, which the Buddha says are more accurate? And for most people, the problem is a lack of sati and samadhi. So when our mindfulness and our concentration are not sufficiently strong, then these intellectual ideas remain simply intellectual ideas. So it's through the cultivation of strong sati, so this precise, clear awareness, detailed, precise awareness of our experience, coupled with samadhi, so this powerfully focused and stabilized attention, powerfully focused and stabilized mind, which allows that attention to start to pierce beneath the superficial layer of intellectual thought and start to more deeply examine our actual experience. So maybe, Tanwait, if you'd like to talk a bit more about Vipassana practice and Samadhi practice.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you've touched off some thoughts in my mind about some ways I think we experience this in our day-to-day lives, about the difference between our intellectual understanding of the way things are and how we actually experience life. I think one way that it is, one time when it really strikes home is if we experience a loss of some kind or other. For example, the loss of a loved one, or when we experience our own aging, or we experience illness. We can experience, it's quite common to experience some very strong negative emotions. Even though we know intellectually that we're going to age. For example, when we look in the mirror and we see the first gray hair, it can be quite a surprise. And we say to ourselves, oh, really already, me, I'm getting old and I've got gray hairs now. This is quite a surprise, and it feels quite bad, usually. Or if we lose a loved one, say a parent passes away, or a spouse, for example, it can be quite devastating. First we might experience shock, and then experience denial, and then experience grief, and we go through these kinds of experiences. But intellectually, we always knew that our loved ones were going to pass away. These are just some kinds of examples. And the reason is that the intellectual understanding is just kind of on the surface, and deep down the mind doesn't really understand this. And the reason this is important is that it's the mind that initiates emotions. Yet it is, unless we're quite clearly mindful, the mind is beset by inaccurate perceptions of the way life is working. The fundamental distortions of perception are, just as Bhante was saying, that formations are constant, that they are pleasant, and that they are ours, and they're us. These things. So, fourth one, the seeing that which is actually repulsive as being beautiful, is a fourth kind of perversion of perception. So experiencing, so even though we have the intellectual understanding that all formations are impermanent, or at least that we know that we're going to get old, for example, and we're subject to illness and subject to dying, the heart doesn't really understand this. It isn't experiencing life accurately as long as we're not clearly mindful. And this is important again because it's the heart that initiates emotions that then we have to experience. It initiates emotions without consulting us. If we can clarify our mindfulness and be aware with a unified mind, that is a mind that's in samadhi, then the mind can experience life as it really is, without these perversions of perception, when the mind is clouded by delusion. And the more it learns, it learns very thoroughly, because the entire heart is all together, the mind is all together. It sinks down deeply, you might say, is another way of putting it. It can start developing what they call the insight knowledges associated with experiencing life as being impermanent. Sankharas, that is, as being impermanent and being unpleasant, or at least unsatisfactory, is another way of putting it, and not being us and ours. This is how we go through the learning stages, the insight knowledges.
Yeah, so again, it's emphasizing that the power of one's vipassana practice, the power of one's insight practice, is dependent upon the strength of one's samadhi practice. So this is the really important element, which often gets overlooked, again, when talking about vipassana meditation, which is that without samadhi meditation, there is no vipassana meditation. Without developing a sharp, precise, focused, and stable mind, then it's not possible to see things clearly. It's not possible to see in a refined, precise, and penetrative way. So this is, the Buddha was very clear in countless places in the suttas. He clearly states that samadhi is a necessary precondition for the arising of insight. It's a necessary precondition for this Itabhutang Jnana Dasanang, so knowing and seeing things as they actually are, so knowing and seeing things accurately. So in our practice, it's important to first off, to actually study the Dhamma, study the suttas. So in order to develop vipassana, we also need to understand what it is we're trying to develop. So if we want to talk about insight, well, unless one has the karma of a Sammasambuddha, which, let's be realistic, most of us don't. Unless one has the karma of a Sammasambuddha, then we can't expect to figure this stuff out on our own. So the first thing is actually making use of the beautiful inheritance that we have from the Buddha. So the Buddha gave us an incredible gift in teaching the Dhamma in many ways and in great detail. So we have the opportunity to study that and use it as a guide for understanding how to cultivate wisdom, how to develop vipassana. And similarly, the Buddha gave instructions on samadhi. And admittedly, the Buddha did not go into great detail on samadhi itself. But I think that's actually because samadhi itself is not complicated. Samadhi itself is simply when the mind is still and awake, when the mind is completely still and completely awake. So alert and motionless. It's actually not a complicated thing. We make it seem so complicated, but it just seems complicated because we're really, really good at making our minds messy. So we sit down to meditate and we spend the entire time thinking about TV shows, or we spend the entire time like writing stories in our head, or we spend the entire time daydreaming, or we spend the whole time ruminating about conversations we had days ago. So it's not that samadhi is a complicated thing. It's just that we like to spend our meditation time doing something else. So another important element here is recognizing how deeply addicted we are to distraction, how addicted we are to useless thinking, how addicted we are to mental activity, or how addicted we are to spaciness. Actually, many people, they just really, really like that kind of hazy, cloudy, nebulous feeling of like drifting and drifting. And then the bell rings and they're like, such a peaceful meditation. And it's like, well, yes, naps are also peaceful meditation. Not useful for awakening, but certainly peaceful. So it's recognizing that samadhi itself is not a complicated thing, but it can be difficult. And what makes it difficult is the incredibly bad habits we've developed with our mind. And what makes it difficult then is learning how to go against those habits, learning how to restructure the mind. And this is something which again needs to be done in every moment. So if you look at the Buddha's teachings, a tremendous volume of what the Buddha was talking about in the suttas is sila. It's virtue, it's morality, it's generosity, it's kindness. And this is because the Buddha himself, he directly says that when one develops sila well, then you will naturally have better samadhi. There's, for example, the Upanisa Sutta, the Buddha says that for one who has sila, it's, and I'm abbreviating because we don't have time to go through the whole discourse, but he says for one who has sila, it's natural that samadhi arises. They don't need to make some strong effort to produce samadhi. It's natural for them. So this is actually one of the major thrusts of the Buddhist teachings, is the critical importance of practicing kindness, of practicing morality, of cultivating an unmessy life, an uncomplicated life. Because if we live a unmessy and uncomplicated life, then that leads to having an unmessy and uncomplicated mind, which then leads to much easier samadhi practice. Do you have anything more you want to say, or should we take some questions?
Maybe take some questions.
Okay. Yeah. So I see there's a few people joining in online. So first off, hello to all the people joining in. So hello to Gayatri, Christina, Elenisa, Manal, Jake, Kumu, Jayanta, Julie, Karuna, Mary, Jeff, Let It Go, Shihan, Bhumika, Kim, Sud, Kobe, Shadow of Label, Egod, and Yankee. Welcome to all of you. And Sud says, is there any benefit to having intellectual understanding? Would recollecting this at the time of death, let's say, would that lead away from rebirth towards lower attachments?
Is there benefit to having intellectual understanding? Would recollecting this? Oh, okay, recollecting this.
Recollecting the intellectual knowledge? So, well, I think it depends upon intellectual knowledge of what. So if we're talking about intellectual knowledge of how to administer capitalist business models, or intellectual knowledge on the precise ratio of cats to dogs in North America or something like that, then no, that's not going to help you get one step closer to awakening. And if you do fixate on such things at the time of death, yes, that probably is going to lead to further attachment to samsara. But if we're talking intellectual knowledge of the Dhamma, well, that actually can be useful. Because the point of learning the Dhamma intellectually is that it gives us a framework for understanding how to learn the Dhamma experientially. So it gives us a framework for applying the mind to seeing the Buddhist truth in our own experience. So, for example, if at the time of death you remember, oh, the Buddha said all things are impermanent, you're like, oh, he was right. This body is breaking up and dying. This mind is breaking up and dying. Turns out it's impermanent. The Buddha said that which is impermanent is not ourself. That which is impermanent is impersonal. Well, this must mean that this body and mind are also impersonal, not self. So in that sense, recollecting intellectual knowledge of the Dhamma can be a support to attaining awakening at the time of death, or at least inclining the mind towards further Buddhist practice in future lives. So those are my thoughts. Do you have any further thoughts on this question?
Sure, I think that's a good point, that that having this intellectual knowledge does have some benefit. I think one thing to consider is a big variable in here about the time of death, as we never know when or how we're going to die, and what kind of mental condition we're going to be in because of that, and so, while having intellectual knowledge is good, and it's certainly a good start, that once you have it, that it would be to your benefit to try to practice also, to practice meditation. For example, the ability to make the mind calm could be very beneficial during various death scenarios. When we might be experiencing pain, for example. Or things may be happening that are out of our control, or that might find ourselves in embarrassing situations and what have you. If you think about the wide range of death scenarios there are, the ability to make the mind calm could be very helpful. And in addition to that, then if you're able to make the mind calm, if you're able to be in samadhi while you're passing away, then this intellectual knowledge, you can capitalize on it to actually direct the mind in experiencing things as they really are, through one of the most intense experiences of impermanence possible, the death of your own body, and so that could lead to insight knowledge even at the time of death, theoretically. So.
Okay. And Egod says, Venerable Anuruddha said in his definition of mindfulness is that he's able to perceive the repulsive and the non-repulsive and vice versa. What is meant by this? How is this practiced? Well, first off, I would say be very careful with the word repulsive. So if you know the Pali, do you know the Pali for this one? From Anuruddha in particular, because sometimes the word repulsive is used to translate the word asubha, which is not correct. But sometimes it's used to translate patikula, which is a bit closer, but still not the best.
It's seeing the subha and asubha, seeing asubha and asubha, seeing asubha and asubha, seeing subha.
Okay. Okay, so in that case, again, so asubha literally means non-beauty. So translating it as, it's sometimes translated as repulsiveness or ugliness or things like that, but that's not correct. It literally just means non-beauty. So being able to see the beautiful as non-beautiful or the non-beautiful as beautiful. So what Anuruddha is talking about here is he's talking about how the mind normally projects a value judgment on our experiences based upon our underlying preferences. And usually we don't recognize that this process is happening. So we just see something or hear something or smell something or taste something or touch something, and we immediately think, oh, this is attractive, this is appealing, I like this. And so we relate to it as though it's objectively pleasant, objectively attractive. But then somebody else might have the same experience and reject it as being objectively unattractive, objectively disgusting, objectively repulsive. But the object itself, the sensation itself, whatever that sensation might be, is not inherently either beautiful or repulsive. It just is exactly what it is. So what Venerable Anuruddha is probably talking about here, of course I don't know for sure because I'm not Venerable Anuruddha, but what he was probably talking about here is that he had trained his mind to the point where he was no longer going with those habitual value judgments. So when he had a sensory experience, he understood it as it actually is. So again, like most unawakened people, like if you see, say, another person, the mind immediately categorizes them as either beautiful, ugly, or something in between. Or you hear a sound and you immediately classify it as like a pleasant sound, an unpleasant sound, or something in between. So the mind just immediately does this, and it does it so quickly that we usually don't even notice the process. But in a few places in the suttas, the Buddha mentions that with the advance in our Buddhist training, we can get to a point where we can stop that process, where we can stay with the direct sensation without adding in the value judgment of attractive or repulsive, of beautiful or ugly. We can just be with the experience as it actually is. And that this is a much more peaceful state of mind, because then one's natural state is equanimity. So we're not constantly being pulled around by desire and aversion, but rather the mind's natural state is equanimity. So I believe that's what Anuruddha was talking about. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think, well, one thing I'm curious about is what you would say, Bhante, about with your knowledge of Pali and the use of the word mindfulness in this setting. I think oftentimes in modern America, in Buddhist circles, mindfulness is kind of usually considered like a present moment awareness, kind of a non-reactive present moment awareness. But this sounds like it would be something to me to be more and more kind of active, where he's doing something and I wonder if you put a sharper point on the meaning of the word mindfulness in this kind of a setting.
Well, honestly, I'd have to see the sutta itself.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And see the context for this to really speak more deeply about that. So, EGOT, if you can email the monastery with the sutta reference that you're talking about, and maybe we'll do it during a sutta study one of these days. And Sud says, what are the preconditions that lead to samadhi? Would you like to talk a bit about the preconditions for samadhi?
Oh boy.
I mean, I just spoke extensively about it the other day, so... and I could talk about samadhi all day, every day, but I think it's your turn now.
Okay. Let's see, preconditions for samadhi. We have the, already talked quite a bit about sila as being one of them. Let's see, we go at this from a couple of different angles. There's restraining of the senses, for example, wherein we keep the mind from going out and grasping onto particulars in what we're experiencing through the sense doors, helping the mind to stay calm this way and not get overly involved with things external to us. Because samadhi is about the mind coming together. It's about mental collectedness. We don't want to be letting it go out and get involved with other things too much, but try to keep it on what we're practicing with. There's also moderation in food is one that's extolled in the suttas, and so the Buddha recommended for those who are practicing the Uposatha day, for example, to eat just one meal on that day. So cutting down on food intake is food can kind of stir up the mind and lead to sensual craving, for example, which is a hindrance to mental collectedness, to bring the mind together in samadhi. There are additional conditions for the development of samadhi, in that they are conditions for the development of the Noble Eightfold Path, sometimes called the prerequisites for the attainment of stream entry, also another one way that they're identified in the suttas. The qualities called dana, meaning generosity. Then we have sila again, meaning morality. And then, I forgot faith. Faith is usually listed as the first one. Sorry. So faith, generosity, morality, and wisdom. Sometimes a fifth one is added in there between morality and wisdom being great learning. So we have these 4 or 5 listed as being considered by the Theravada tradition to be prerequisites for the development of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so this is where our practice of generosity directly feeds into our samadhi practice, for example, as well as a quality like faith. With regard to wisdom, we have 3 kinds of wisdom, and Bhante Sudasa has spoken on this recently. I can't remember if it was on a live stream or which setting it was in. The wisdom we gain from hearing, and then the wisdom we gain from contemplation. So these are kind of more on the intellectual side. We contemplate what we've heard or perhaps read, for example, in Dhamma books. So we come to a thorough intellectual understanding of it. Then the third level of wisdom being the bhavana, meditation, that wisdom which is gained through meditation. So we have these prerequisites also for samadhi.
Okay. And Julie says, is it possible when developing samadhi only a meditator will miss out on becoming aware of their greed and anger, which Vipassana provides an opportunity to see through mindfulness? Do you have some words on this one?
Okay, sure. Let's see. Well, that's a great question. Let's see. We develop mindfulness in the first place through the development of sila and mindfulness. Also, we use our mindfulness to clarify the mind and to bring it together into samadhi. And with the samadhi, we continue being mindful. With the attainment of the 4th jhana, for example, the qualities of the 4th jhana are equanimity and mindfulness. Okay. And so when we attain samadhi, it's all about being able to clearly see what is going on, being able to experience things as they really are. Now, to go into samadhi, we have to overcome the 5 hindrances. One of those is be ill will. And so we have to go through a process of working with the hindrances, including ill will, in order to go into samadhi and kind of go past them. And then the meditator becomes tries to directly experience the various mental objects that arise while in samadhi. So various kinds of emotions and thoughts, for example, or perhaps brings up an image of the body, for example, and penetrates through that with insight to really see it as it is. So various points in the process of meditation, using mindfulness in developing samadhi, the meditator has to work with something like ill will, and I think actually you mentioned sensual desire or craving, greed.
Mm.
Okay, greed, and greed would come up is represented in the hindrances to some degree with sensual desire, and so the meditator does have to work with these on the path of mindfulness and developing samadhi. And interestingly, once you go into samadhi, it isn't like these things are while they're suppressed. It isn't like you don't have any experiences of these kinds of things at all, but actually the mind is kind of on top of them, meaning that with good mindfulness and the mind well collected together, it can kind of stay on top of these things. And so can see the arising of some degree of sense desire, ill will, or something like this. But there's no way that they, as long as the samadhi is good, there's no way that they can kind of really overtake the mind or cause one to get caught up in them. And so the meditator is actually not completely cut off from a wide range of mental objects or mental states that can arise, but it actually is in an ideal position to observe those as well and to move past them into even subtler things.
Yeah, I would also add that a lot of where this becomes relevant is actually, again, outside of meditation. So outside of meditation, when we encounter challenging or difficult situations, so situations which are provocative of desire or aversion, if we've already developed very good sati and samadhi, then when those things occur, we'll recognize what's going on in the mind, and we'll recognize very quickly what's starting to happen, and we'll be able to properly redirect the mind. So pulling the mind away from that difficult situation or difficult tendency. So this actually is part of why it's important actually not to just meditate for 20 hours a day, but also to, for example, interact with other community members or do some light chores around the monastery and such things, precisely because these are things which bring up our defilements, especially interacting with other people. It's a great way to bring up our defilements. And in so doing, then we get to observe those tendencies of mind with that samadhi power that we've developed. We get to observe those tendencies of mind and start to correct the mind's behaviors. And Sud is clarifying that his earlier question was about intellectual knowledge of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Yeah. And Julie says, before I discovered the teachings of the Buddha, I used to meditate by gazing at a candle. Can this be considered a non-Buddhist form of samadhi? It seems as though it helped me with Vipassana meditation when I learned this practice. So I wouldn't actually be so quick as to call it non-Buddhist, because you're using a visual meditation object, which is not necessarily wrong. It also can be a way of doing meditation on the fire casino, which is not a practice that I personally teach, but I know other monks who do. It could also be an entry point towards the white casino or the yellow casino, based on the color of the candle flame. Again, it can also just be a way of developing focus through a visual object. So it's not necessarily wrong, and if it's helpful, then it's helpful. But it's not commonly recommended within Buddhist circles. But it's not, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a non-Buddhist form of samadhi. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, or is that sufficient?
I think it's great.
Okay. And Louisa has a question. but they later said their question will be better suited for monk chat. So Louisa, you can bring your question to monk chat and we'll answer it then. And Santa Celeste Moya, what a wonderful name. The Holy Celestial One, something like that. So it says, if in this life we do not get to awakening, then are we rebirth? I assume you mean reborn. Yes, that's correct. Once we get to awakening, where do we go? Well, actually, the Buddha made an interesting metaphor about this. But briefly speaking, the Buddha said that it's not a valid question to ask, where do we go? The Buddha said that question doesn't apply. It's just not relevant to an awakened being. So we're free from the cycle of rebirth, but it's not accurate either to say that we cease existing or that we continue to exist. Neither one is an accurate statement. Can we go into more detail regarding awakening? That's what we've been doing for years now. So, yes, listen to all the Dhamma talks we've given for the past 7 years or so. You'll find lots of information. Yeah, briefly speaking, awakening means the clear seeing of reality as it actually is. And it also means the complete removal of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's a very brief answer. Okay, and this is kind of an odd question. H says, what's the easiest way to enlightenment in your opinion? What do you think?
I say the Buddhist way.
Okay, yeah, Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. I think that's the easiest way. Actually, I once asked my preceptor this question. Actually, when I was still a layman, I said, what's the fastest way to stream entry? And his answer was, follow the Noble Eightfold Path. And I was like, okay. And H also says, about telepathic dharma affecting my life in a negative way due to mind games being played. I have no idea what you're talking about. Telepathic dharma affecting my life in a negative way. Do you have any idea?
Sorry. Mind games being played telepathically. Okay. Well, actually, it looks like it may continue.
It's just to abstain from attaining much negative dharma.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure what to say to that.
Yeah, I think H, you'll have to explain what you mean by telepathic dharma in mind games. But I would just briefly say, don't believe your thoughts. Your thoughts are not yours, and 99% of it is utter nonsense anyway. So don't believe your thoughts. And Egad mentions the sutta quote. So yeah, Egad, if you can send that to the monastery email, then we'll put it in for a sutta study. And Mano says, did Buddha describe samadhi with a kind of divinity? What are your thoughts?
Describe samadhi with a kind of divinity. The only, well, this reminds me of two possible terms. I wonder if this is referring to either this may be a little bit far-fetched, recollection of the Devas or the Brahma Viharas. Okay.
Yeah, do you want to talk about those? I think both of those might be relevant.
Sure. Okay. Well, sure. So the Buddha talked about recollection of the Devas, for example. The Devas, Deva in Pali, as I understand it, means the shining ones. So they say that the bodies of Devas are shining. They're quite radiant. And the Buddha described in detail the practice to Lady Visakha when he was telling her about the Uposatha day observance. He said that the way you practice recollection of the Devas is you consider that whatever faith and generosity and morality and wisdom they had to be reborn as Devas, I also have. And it seems that Lady Visakha was endowed with a great deal of these four qualities, actually. And so if we look at ourselves and see, well, we have some degree of faith, generosity, morality, and wisdom. And these are qualities that that are footing for being reborn in the Dewa realms, as Dewas. Then this can be quite gladdening to the heart and help the mind come together around these themes into a state of samadhi, according to the theory, and then therefore a foothold for going forward into vipassana practice. The Brahma Viharas, oftentimes translated into English as the divine abidings, or the more literally the abiding places or the abidings of Brahma, because they say that Brahma is reborn as he is, and the Brahma gods are reborn as they are because of practicing the Brahma Viharas, these 4 forms of meditation, namely loving kindness meditation, sometimes called goodwill meditation, meditation on compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And they say, in fact, that at least the greatest Brahma, I'm not sure if all of them, have 4 faces. One on the right, one on the left, one in front, and one in back. Each one representing one of these Brahma Viharas: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And each one of those is a pretty substantial topic, but there's a wealth of information about them available as well. So, and they also can be themes around which we bring the mind into samadhi and serve as footholds for practicing vipassana.
And Santa Celeste Moya says, please explain samsara for me. It's a very long question, but briefly speaking, samsara is the cycle of painful birth and death, which is what we're trying to understand and break free of through practicing Buddhism. And okay, and Scott has off-topic question, so it's a good question, but if you can bring that to Mug Chat on Saturday. So Sud says, Friday, Mug Chat on Friday. Did I say Saturday? Oh, Mug Chat on Friday. Sud says, does the Buddha give any time frame that it takes to develop samadhi? I follow sila, I am usually a generous person, I have faith, I read Buddhist books, but I have no samadhi. Am I doing something wrong? What do you think?
Well, I don't know if the Buddha did give a time frame in the suttas. He gave in one sutta, the or the Satipatthana Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, that if we practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the meditations, that we will attain at least anagami within 7 years, although it could be much quicker. This is usually understood as being quite continuous practice. Something that can be difficult to do in lay life. I don't know if Sud is a monastic or a lay person.
Layperson.
Okay. So it's so it's something that is quite difficult to practice continuously in lay life. So I'm not sure what else to say. As far as I know, I haven't seen any reference to a specific timeline for attaining samadhi. Yeah, you can see for yourself when you practice your meditation about how well the mind stays on the theme. So, for example, if you're practicing breath meditation, you can see, well, how well am I able to keep my mind on the breath? How long have I been practicing? This can give you a sense for it. You want to be able to keep in order to develop samadhi, you want to be able to keep the mind on the breath quite continuously over a very substantial period of time, without the mind going off into other things. Even if one practices the Uposatha day, for example, and spends the whole day meditating, doing like the equivalent of a one-day retreat, I think it is quite uncommon for a person to really go into jhana, frankly, to go into samadhi, even in a whole day of practicing that way, trying to practice pretty continuously. So not to try to sound pessimistic, but rather to encourage you, if you have an opportunity, to try to go on an extended retreat, perhaps spending time in a monastery or a retreat center for a while. If you do have an interest in attaining samadhi, which is, I certainly want to encourage you to do. It's for your benefit.
Yeah, similarly, if one wants to get deep samadhi, then you need to do a retreat of at least a week. And actually, if you're really serious about getting anywhere with samadhi, I recommend doing a month-long retreat. So a month-long retreat, you can get very strong samadhi. On a day-to-day basis, well, you need to look and see what comes up in your mind when you try to meditate. So if what comes up in your mind is song lyrics, well, then that's an indication you need to stop listening to music. If what comes up in your mind is TV shows and movies, well, then you need to stop watching TV shows and movies. If what comes up in your mind is political conversations, well, then you need to stop having political conversations. So the kind of distractions and thoughts that appear during our meditation are often some clue about what we're doing during the rest of our life that's obstructing our samadhi. So the usual advice is that when obstructing thoughts appear in meditation, you just keep doing your meditation. But sometimes it can be worth taking note. What's the content of these thoughts? Because sometimes that gives you a clue as to what you're doing that's mucking up your mind. So samadhi is conditional. So we need to create the supporting conditions in our life, or else we're not getting samadhi. So Karuna says, I've been doing the 4 hours since Sunday. Congratulations. That's very impressive. I look forward to hearing about how it goes for you. And she continues, no question, but I would love some encouraging words because it's been a bit challenging. Yeah, keep at it. It is challenging. It is meant to be a challenging practice. But it is that level of challenge which makes it effective. So I think it's really impressive that you're doing this, and I think keep going with it, and keep in mind that this is something which many, many other practitioners have done and gotten great benefit from. And when you do run across challenges, then you can smile because challenge means progress. If our practice wasn't challenging, then it wouldn't be useful. We could all just spend our day lounging around and not doing anything, and it would not be challenging, but we also wouldn't make any progress. So it's actually good to deliberately do challenging things with our practice from time to time. So I say sadhu to your 4 hours. That's great. There's also some encouraging nods and smiles from the other people here who remember this. Yudi's asking, what is the 4 hours? So last Sunday, I gave a talk on samadhi in which I encouraged everyone to do 4 hour long periods of sitting meditation every day for a week. And I'm happy to hear that one person took me up on that, which is higher. I was expecting 0. So I'm happy that I got 1 instead of 0. And you have a question?
Yeah, Bhante. So I have a question on what are some meditation practices that support samadhi?
Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of breathing. Metta can be helpful, but not in the early stages. Only after metta is well developed to the point where you have the metta feeling in the mind. Then you can focus on the metta feeling, and then it becomes a support to samadhi. It can become a samadhi object. But yeah, I mean, it's, again, samadhi is not complicated. Put your mind on the object and don't move it. That's it.
Yeah, so when I've been I've been trying to practice breathing meditation to develop my samadhi, and there'll be random thoughts that will appear in my mind, and sometimes I would encourage it, or when there's times when I try to focus back on the meditation, it will be really difficult. So it's like a battle with my mind, and then sometimes I'll realize that I'm being impatient with myself, and I just want to just get up and just look away, just not experience the pain. So I'm recognizing a lot of impatience or stubbornness, and sometimes I feel like passive aggressiveness, and not just with meditation, but with some of these practices.
Sometimes we just have to give up all hope and just resign ourselves to the horrific messiness of our situation and just relax and just see all these crazy, stupid thoughts flowing through the mind as just the natural result of past causes and conditions. And just see it as, oh, that's not me. It's just the product of past causes and conditions. That's just, of course, these things are coming up naturally. You yell into an echo canyon and it's going to keep echoing back at you for possibly even a few minutes. That's what echo canyons do. So that's our mind. Our mind will just keep echoing back. And it takes a long time for those echoes to fade away completely. So you just relax and you're like, okay, yep, there's going to be some echoing in this mind for a while. Okay. I'm just going to sit here patiently until those echoes fade away, even if it takes 20 years. So we also need to remember we're playing a long game here. So Buddhism is not a game of quick, instant results. It's not like you pop a pill and poof, instant arhat. Onset in 15 to 20 minutes. It's not like that. It's like you're expecting this path is going to take at least 20 years, and 20 years is fast. Realistically, it's going to be a lot longer than 20 years. 20 years is kind of like an absolute bare minimum for somebody who's like super amazing. So, of course, we're not going to attain absence of thought in one meditation period, or even 1 week in a monastery, or even a year, or even a decade, or even, realistically, probably not even in a lifetime. But what we're doing is we're just constantly, patiently creating supportive conditions, which will make it possible eventually. And eventually might mean tomorrow, or it might mean next year, or it might mean next life. It doesn't matter. But we just keep creating the conditions, which eventually will lead to the arising of samadhi, to the experience of jhana, and eventually to the purification of the mind. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I can add one small thing. I wonder if you indulge me, Bhante. Yeah, one thing that I found helpful when I was experiencing the same kind of inner battle, with my thoughts and not wanting to have thoughts and so on like this. It sounds like quite a great deal of energy inside, mental energy going on. I used to I'd set an alarm and lie down and practice lying meditation. I found this is quite relaxing or calming. It's a little tidbit also. Sure.
Okay. And Happy Smiley, good name. Okay, Happy Smiley says, in conventional working life, must we attain jhana? I thought we are 24/7 doing meditation satipatthana with a smiling face like Ajahn Chah and the Buddha. Is it okay? Thanks. So it's actually not like Ajahn Chah and the Buddha, because both Ajahn Chah and the Buddha attained jhana, and they certainly weren't doing conventional working life. But no, in conventional working life, you don't need to attain jhana. Yes, you can just do 24/7 satipatthana with a smiling face. That's actually a great practice. I wish everybody in the world did 24/7 satipatthana with a smiling face. That would be great. I mean, you won't attain awakening in this lifetime doing this, but you'll help create supportive conditions for awakening in a future life. Those are my thoughts. What do you think?
Okay, well, that's right. She's probably already heard Happy Smiley. It's a wonderful smile in her picture. You already heard us extolling the benefits of trying to do retreat as well. So that's the other option. But yeah, certainly this kind of practice in lay life, going about your daily activities with mindfulness of the body, for example, and the bodily postures and so on, and being aware of what the mind is doing, and the 4 foundations of mindfulness practice would be a great benefit also. Even if we don't get into jhana.
Okay, and that looks like the last question. Anything from the residents here? No? Good enough for one day?
Can I mention a follow-up to something I said? Responding to theory, I said practicing lying meditation to set an alarm. And I wanted to clarify this, because setting an alarm, I used to do this because if I relaxed enough, I'd fall asleep. So if I got too calm or something like this, wasn't paying enough attention. So I set an alarm to keep myself from falling asleep. So set it for half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour ahead, and that way try to keep myself from falling asleep. Clarify a little bit by that.
Oh, there's a question here. So Ethan says, is there a parallel term in the suttas for silent illumination concentration found in the Mahayana? Yes, animitta samadhi. The term animitta samadhi appears to correspond more or less exactly to silent illumination meditation. And Animitta Samadhi, as you say here, it is sometimes translated as signless concentration, which I think is a phenomenally bad translation. So Animitta I would translate as objectless or possibly featureless, but I would not translate it as signless. But yes, Animitta Samadhi would be the one. Yeah. You have a question?
Yes, do you have tips for maintaining sati and more sati and accelerating samadhi in my meditation practice?
Well, first off, the important thing is to constantly maintain mindfulness at all times from the moment you wake up. So constantly being mindful of your body and constantly aware of what's going on in your mind. So the really critical piece is constant mindfulness of the body at all times. So no matter where you are, what's going on, your number one priority is to have maximum intensity awareness of your own body. No matter what, no matter where you are, what situation, what's happening, that's your number one priority. There's actually a really cute story from Ajahn Mahabua where he was talking to somebody about like maintaining constant attention on your meditation object no matter what. And the person said like, even if it was like during a conversation, and would you still prioritize your meditation object over the conversation? And Ajahn Mahabua didn't reply. Okay, you had a question?
Respond to me. I recall something that you said on some day regarding this topic, and then just thinking of the context of all the ways samatha and vipassana are spoken, sort of like in contrast, or almost like in a the point that I remember you, I think, and if I understood correctly, saying on some days, like some people speak about you have to quote come out of samadhi to do vipassana, etc. And I guess my broad and slightly nebulous question would be any additional comments you have around the relationship of them to each other, not just that samadhi enables vipassana, but relation to each other, sequentiality, like anything that further expounds on that comment from somebody.
Yeah, honestly, no. My mind is completely blank right now. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on this?
See, I think I missed this comment on Sunday. This idea of you have to. Sorry, the cat is trying to eat the computer cables. Sorry. Okay. Pseudo emergency. Sorry. Okay. So. So you don't have to come out of samadhi to practice vipassana. And in fact, you want the mind to be in samadhi when you're practicing vipassana. So you actually can use a bit of contemplation to help you get into samadhi, for example. If, for example, you've got something you're really attached to, and you're thinking about a lot when you're meditating, you could contemplate the fact that what you're thinking about is uncertain. For example, if you're having thoughts of the future, for example, your mind says, "Well, these thoughts about the future, they're basically fantasies," this kind of thing. Using a little bit of wisdom in terms of how we see our mental patterns, and help the mind to let go of it and then go back to our meditation object. Then once we want to try to attain samadhi and be in samadhi when we're practicing vipassana, because basically what it means is experiencing life as it really is, with the whole mind altogether. The samadhi meaning the whole mind altogether, so that the mind can thoroughly learn. Can kind of the whole mind can learn at once about the way things really are, and in that way affect change in its behavior. Kind of like if you're in an organization, say a company, for example, and You want the say you're the boss and you want the team to change how they're doing things. You want to get the message to everybody in the company, to everyone in the organization, to affect an organizational change. Okay. If you only tell one person, for example, then it's not really going to affect the whole company very well, the whole organization. And so samadhi is sort of like that, because the mind is like a committee. Or it's like a group. It's like a whole organization, but they often don't know what one each other is doing. They don't often agree on what's going on and what they should be doing, and so on like this. So we want to collect them all together and have them all see or experience the way life really is together at the same time. And then this can affect change in behavior, so that the mind doesn't. If we attain path and fruit, for example, the mind doesn't initiate unskillful emotions on its own, that aren't really good for us. So the samadhi, having the whole mind all together, while you're trying to experience life as it really is, is a key element.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Because people, as you had sort of alluded to the other day, people speak sometimes of these two things in a falsely bifurcated way. So that's right.
Yeah, sometimes it can be useful to relate to these as like two sides of one coin. So two directly interrelated aspects of Buddhist meditation. So they're not things which they can't really be pulled apart completely. Okay, and Elenisa says, I am going to do 4 hours per day. I love the idea. Great, very good. Yes, excellent. May you all have deep samadhi. Yes.
I wonder if they understand though it's 4 hours continuous rather than 4 hours
4
per
hours
day.
continuous. I was pretty clear in the Dhamma talk on Sunday, I thought.
What was it published?
4 hours continuous. Yeah, so the point was to do 4 hours continuous sitting, like not getting up for 4 hours straight.
But
So,
if you can't do that, if this is a surprise to you that it was 4 hours continuous, doing 4 hours a day is also good if you have to split.
yes, yes. Most people do much less than 4 hours a day. So even doing 4 hours in like 8 30-minute segments is already very impressive. So it looks like that's the last question. So I think we'll go ahead and end the session at this time.
Handamayam Dhammagadhaya Sadhukaram Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. Okay, we'll see you all next time.